Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Bronwyn Edwards. I'm from Roses in the Ocean. I'm the CEO there and also one of the co-design facilitators, and really pleased to be working on this particular co-design with you all here at Tweed. I'd like to introduce Lindy.
Hi everyone, nice to be here, and I also am really enjoying the co-design with the Tweed area.
So today we're here for feedback loop number 1. Now the process that we're doing within Tweed is a little bit different to others, but we'll take you through all of that in just a moment. But first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting, on which you are meeting. There in the Tweed area, the Bundjalung Nation. Here where I am in Brisbane, it's the Turrbal people. So wanting to acknowledge the traditional owners and their elders past, present and future, and really just acknowledge how much that we have to learn from our First Nations people in so many aspects of life, but most definitely within suicide prevention as well. So I'd also like to acknowledge people with a lived experience of suicide. To all of those of you who have already shared your incredible insights and wisdom to this process, thank you so much. We acknowledge also that a lot of health professionals, you do come to your work every day with a lived experience of suicide. And for those who don't have a lived experience, we know that you are absolutely impacted very significantly by the people that you support. So thank you all for being here. So I'm actually going to share my screen now, and what we're going to do is take you through the information that we have collected to date through the process, and just talk you through that, talk you through the next steps as well. So bear with me while I share my screen for a moment, and then we will be underway. All right, so what you can see on screen here at the moment is a standard co-design process. As mentioned, we're doing things a little bit different in Tweed because it's just so important to get this wonderful alternative to ED safe space open. So we're working in conjunction with the LHD and doing things in a little bit of a different way. So far in this bespoke process, you will have had access to the orientation webinar. If you haven't watched that yet, please do. It's a fantastic, it's 50 minutes of your time, but it will give you a really terrific overview of where this process fits in, where this project fits in with all of the other initiatives going on in New South Wales. And it gives you a really good reflection from the very first co-design process that took place with Illawarra Shoalhaven earlier this year. There's also the information pack there for you. And then we have gone on and we've had 4 hours with a group of lived experience people. And then we've had focus group conversations with a number of health professionals in small group situations. We are now in feedback loop 1. And what we're doing in this feedback loop is we're actually combining all of the information that both groups of people have shared with us into the one feedback loop. At the end of this, this recorded webinar will be available for you to share, and please do that far and wide. We do need as many people from your Tweed community to be aware of this project and to be contributing their voice. There'll also be a survey with which we'd ask you to have a look at. All of these slides are included in it, the particular slides that are necessary as well for you to comment further on. And hopefully other people in your community can come on, have a look at this, and then participate in that survey. So the purpose of this feedback loop is to provide the context of the co-design process, make sure we've got it right so far. What we've captured is what we've heard and what you've meant us to hear. So we want to gather broader views and experiences. We're going to pose some additional questions for you in the actual survey because we want to keep exploring, we want to keep uncovering things that need to be discussed as a community in terms of what do you want this safe space to look like and do and feel like. And then this will help prepare for that next stage of the co-design process, is when there's a group of the health professionals coming together as a group, and that will be facilitated by Amy from your LHD. Okay, so if we move on from here, the perspectives that we have had so far that you're seeing today, we've captured from a diverse range of people, including those with lived experience who have had a lived experience of suicidal thoughts and or suicide attempt. They may have also had a lived experience of caring for someone who has been suicidal or attempted suicide. Now, we have reached out to people who have accessed ED at that time, but also people who have chosen not to access ED. And by the nature of suicide, I suppose, there are many of us who have multiple layers of our lived experience. And so we have also had people who have had those other lived experiences, but have also been bereaved by suicide. When it comes to our health professionals, we've had people from Family Centre Youth Homeless team, AOD, Community Health, Towards Zero Suicide, coordinator, NGO recovery workers, our Indigenous representation and sexual health. So we've had a really nice diversity. We would really love, there has been a strong youth focus today, so we would really love you to make sure that you do get this survey and this webinar out as far and wide as possible so that we can grab even more diversity in our health professional perspectives as well. So what we did was in these first stages, we have explored the emotions and feelings experienced by a person who's needing some support, seeking help, or someone who's supported somebody else who's needed to seek help through ED. And we explored the reasons why they felt those emotions and feelings. Why did they feel that way? And what needs did they have at each of the different stages of accessing help through ED? We then also explored the emotions and feelings experienced by people who chose not to access support through ED and why. The following slides highlight key points of discussion and feedback from this first phase. What I also wanted to mention was when it came to the health professionals, the focus was still on emotions and feelings. We still needed to know, what is it like to walk a day in your shoes? And what is it like for you as a health professional to be supporting someone who needs that support, and you either have supported them by taking them through the ED process, or if they haven't gone to ED, what's that been like for you as well? All right, so everything has been captured. Everything is de-identified, as we explained to people in the co-design process. The most common themes are shown on the following slides. So when we come to understanding your experience, we're going to just show you, as I said, some common themes that have come through, and we're going to do it by those various touch points in that process of going through ED. So in that space of when you're finding help, so it's when somebody is feeling suicidal, they haven't gone to ED yet, they're just deciding what are they going to do. They're not quite sure they can keep themselves safe. So what are the emotions and feelings at that particular point in time? Now, from a lived experience perspective, you'll see a number of comments there. I won't read all of these out because they are going to be included in the survey, so you can go through them in detail. But just to give you a feeling for it, a taste for it, I think. One person mentioned that their daughter, understood that she was unwell, desperately crying out for help. Someone was wanting that professional help but was just dismissed. So they phoned for help, and the response they got was less than helpful. None of it was taken seriously. A comment that the AMBOs were kind and helpful. The police tried. Being taken to ED and becoming more lucid on the way. So that person remembers actually being taken and just gaining a little bit more clarity on their way to ED. From a health professional perspective, it was a very strong message. This comment here, it says, I avoid sending to people to ED. I will do everything I can to avoid it. And this was from a health professional. The power is taken away from people in a clinical environment. But others saying that there is sometimes a feeling of safety for some people going to ED because it's a hospital, and people just associate hospital with being a safe place for general reasons. Fearful for the person, not for their suicidality, but for what they will experience in ED. So some pretty strong emotions there in that particular period of time when someone's looking to access help. So Lindy, I'll pass over to you for this arrival and initial assessment phase.
Okay, so on arrival and initial assessment, we again spoke to lived experience participants, and we've identified them as being in the bluey green colour, and then the health professionals. So a lot of the comments were quite similar in that there was a lot of talk about how there was a lot of noise, a lot of people, a lot of movement, that they felt very hypersensitive to that particular noise and just what was going on in the ED at the time that they arrived. They felt very much like they were being interrogated, and perhaps that they needed help straight away but were unable to get it straight away. They felt that coming into ED and actually becoming a little bit more lucid actually in some cases spiked or escalated the way that they were feeling, because they didn't feel that they had a lot of control, but they felt that they were desperate enough that they needed to go somewhere to get some help. From the health professional perspectives, they spoke about just the vibe of the ED area on arrival and initial assessment. One of the things that was really quite poignant was it can be heartbreaking handing someone over to the system. And as a health professional, some of the health professionals commented that they find ED overwhelming even as a health professional. Probably the other most important thing, not that none of them are important, but one of the other overwhelming responses too was that for some of the health professionals, when they have been nurturing someone or supporting someone prior to them actually going or having a crisis situation or feeling suicidal, the reticence in taking them to the ED because they have worked hard to establish trust and not being able to give them information about what is actually going to happen, how long it's going to take. And they felt that once the trust is broken, we have to go backwards in our relationship, and it can be very damaging. And there was a common theme of frustration, I think, from both health professionals and from people with a lived experience. So over to you.
So then we talked about the waiting time. From a lived experience perspective, there was a lot of comments about lengthy waiting times, but also what happened to them while they were waiting and the feelings that they had that people just, they didn't want to talk or engage. There was one person there, and I think this is an interesting point because this person said that they got quite angry. It was the only emotion that they could access at that point in time. But then, of course, the people in ED respond to the anger, and they felt that the anger was what was responded to, not what was actually causing that anger or frustration, and that was very frustrating for them. After the interrogation, anything would have been a better option than that, meaning than just waiting. And the fact that people often felt so incredibly alone at that point in time. So they have plucked up the courage to go to ED, gone through the stage of somebody seeing them initially, that initial triage, but then being left alone made them feel like you didn't meet the criteria of being urgent enough or sick enough, or really, being there as a valid person to attend to. So when you're already feeling quite in that sense, that just sort of compounded some of those really strong emotions that people weren't being heard. From a health professional's perspective, talk about feeling a lot of responsibility. There's a comment there, highly anxious time and a feeling of responsibility that this person that you're supporting is going through this process at ED, that there was a lack of privacy, feeling very exposed, really awkward. It's very difficult to talk to patients in that space, in that real clinical busy setting, and not knowing how long you'll have to wait. So that lack of information and sort of lack of clarity of what that process and those timeframes are going to be. Sometimes the patients can feel betrayed, and as a health professional, they have concerns about their safety. And definitely comment there about sometimes when they take a client to ED, the ED actually can escalate their suicidality and frighten them. And that obviously has a number of different repercussions down the track. So Lindy, over to you.
Treatment, this was quite interesting, and there were some very interesting comments from people with lived experience. It seems the approach is the same whether you're under mental distress or have physical injury, and this seemed to be a little bit sort of confusing in the way it was expressed. However, the point that was being expressed at the time was that there is, because your mental distress wasn't as obvious as someone who was presenting perhaps from a road accident, they felt that they had to sit there and just wait, not knowing what was going to happen. And with the added sort of pressure or the added sort of layer that no one could see what was the problem, because it was something that was, they were experiencing mental distress. Comments that the nurses can be very clinical in their approach, and that is what the opposite of what someone in the middle of an episode of self-harm or suicidal ideation isn't that they need. There are some other comments there about lack of support following any treatment that they may receive. I had a little bit of hope I would be connected with a doctor and something good would come out of this was also expressed. And I think as far as the health professionals responded in relation to their feelings and experiences regarding treatment, that a lot of concern, there was never any expression about a lack of care or support or concern for the person who was actually attending or being treated, but there was comments regarding the system and what was in place currently, that there appeared to be no warmth, that the room in ED was not nice. The responsibility and weight associated with what is going on for the person was felt a lot by the mental health professionals. And one particular comment was in relation to there was little validation even for the mental health professional unless the right person was on duty. So they would pick their time of who they would send to ED or take down to ED or seek treatment from ED. If they knew that there was the right person there, then they would go. Otherwise, they would try to avoid the situation. Thanks, Bronnie.
We then talked about, the feelings and emotions that surround when somebody leaves ED. So from a lived experience perspective, there was much talk about how hard that is to go home or to go back to whatever that situation was, whatever that reality was that was there when you went into ED. So it was quite challenging, in that there was comments that there was just no support whatsoever to actually transition back. Certainly a comment about the stigma that still exists, particularly in small towns, reactions of other people knowing that you've been in ED was quite challenging. That it would have been really nice to have proper follow-up. One person mentioned that they just shoved a phone number on the card and said, call this if you need to get in touch with someone. So that onus, that responsibility was once again back on the person to actually have to reach out, as opposed to have somebody reaching into them. There was promise of support, but they didn't show up. So in one case, yes, the person was, in this particular co-design, was promised that somebody would be in touch the next day, and it just never happened. From a health professional perspective, it says it depends if the treatment sits well with us, and that it's, just expressing that they're actually incredibly scared that if the person's had a bad experience in ED and they're not supported in ED or on leaving, they're really worried about that person and what the next steps are. So sometimes things are not followed through. So there was the same sort of message coming, and that they themselves have to provide the support afterwards because it hasn't been given at the ED. So fairly similar experiences and emotions being felt.
Okay, so after we've gone through those specific sort of touch points, we then spoke and invited participants to just give a general perspective of their experiences with ED. And these were some of the general comments. So there were comments regarding ED from a lived experience perspective, doesn't know how to treat domestic violence or suicide. That was a perspective expressed. EDs are not a point of call for all people in distress. Unfortunately, more damage than good comes out of it. There was a common thread sometimes that the services and staff were not trauma informed in how to deal with someone who was experiencing trauma, specifically in relation to suicide. There was a feeling of screaming to be heard and not being heard. And that it's really, for some people who attend ED, it's the end of the line for them as far as where to go and what to support that they can find. And specifically, I think what summed it all up was that it was not the right environment for people who need one-on-one care at that particular time. From the health professionals' perspective, generally, there was a concern about support for mental health, especially for young people, is in Lismore only, that there are only beds in Lismore. My experience of mental health access line is not always knowing if the client is going to be okay, even if they are being referred on to mental health access line. And even from a health professional perspective, that they felt that they had to hand them over to a system where I don't know what will happen to them, where it is the system is under-resourced and struggling. And that was a common theme. Thanks, Bronnie.
So finally, just some additional comments from lived experience perspectives of people who have never accessed or would never access ED for whatever personal reasons they are. Someone said ED wasn't even anything that they would have even thought of. Others not wanting to be a burden, everything's black and white, no in between, just talking about just their mindset at that point in crisis. That there's a real lack of education on all parties' behalf in terms of where to go and get support. Accessing help is not a thought that comes into your mind for this particular person, and feeling of that not worthy of assistance. And so for those people, they choose to stay away and stay in their own homes as opposed to accessing ED. Now, what needs does our safe space need to meet? So this was a question that we posed to everybody. So we've explored all the emotions and why people are feeling that way, but what are the needs that this alternative to ED space is going to need to meet in order for people to want to be there? So we break these into a number of areas: practical and physical, emotional needs, connection needs. So I won't read them all out. Once again, they are on the slides for you to, and in the survey for you to have a look. But from a practical and physical perspective, warm lights, calming space, it's that warm and welcoming environment, something to eat, cup of tea, something to look at. From an emotional standpoint, a space to allow thoughts to process and settle, safety, a moment of reflection and rest, that sense of agency, for there to be freedom and choice, sense of dignity and grounding, just this place where you can be and you can just breathe and be and relax, and have time to compose. And we know that safe spaces in other parts of the world and in Australia, it's not just for people who are absolutely in suicidal crisis. It's for people who know that if they come here, they can actually prevent them getting to that high level of distress. From a connection perspective, really looking for that one-on-one human connection, that reassurance, compassion, being put first. You know, somebody to meet you where you're at, sit quietly with you if that's what you want, validate feelings and experiences, not being left alone if that's not what you want, a shared power and a normalizing of the distress and the emotions that you're feeling, people wanting to be listened to, taken seriously, respected, no wait time, just knowing that you can literally walk in the door and you'll be welcomed with a smile, and there'll be someone there to hand you a cup of tea and find you somewhere to sit. But being able to identify individual needs and preferences and making sure that that person actually gets what they need. Being allowed to make decisions for yourself, trauma-informed staff who won't judge you and who will just demonstrate kindness and patience to people. In terms of information, some of the ideas that people had come up in terms of their needs were being for the safe space to be able to build their awareness of what other supports might be best for somebody, informed and autonomy over other supports so that they can make informed decisions and then decide if that's what they want to do. Awareness of what's going on internally. So just by having those suicide prevention peer workers who have been through similar experiences, just being able to connect with those people if they want to, and just help to process their own understanding of what's going on for them. Informed decision making, I mentioned, and transparency, being very important about what is going to happen next. Now, just having pure honesty and transparency around the process of when they're in this alternative to ED space. So then we went and looked at some values and principles. So we took everybody through to the guiding values and what have you that are outlined in the statewide requirements document that came out of a very large co-design the end of last year. And then it was up to the people here in the Tweed to determine what are the values and principles going to be of this alternative to ED. And this is critically important, and it's work that you'll need to keep working on and wordsmithing and refining until you're really happy as a community to land on these, because these become your real compass, and this is how you test. You always have to make sure that what the service is delivering is actually honouring these values and principles. So to date, agreed values are those of justice, safe and respectful culture, inclusion and compassion. And then some other values that have been discussed at this stage are accessibility, acceptance, understanding, common humanity, belonging and dignity. So that will be work that will continue to progress through the co-design process and beyond. In terms of principles, so we create a space where we sit alongside you without judgment and you can be heard. We honour individuals in their moment and empower each other to seek connection and support. We act with love, we strive for peace, we are here to help. Our door is open to support your needs, choices and own journey. We strive to uphold your self-determination and dignity. So I think that's a really lovely start as well. And over the process of co-design, I'm sure people will have the ability to continue to have input and to wordsmith those also. So now it was time to do a bit of blue sky dreaming. With the understanding that there are, of course, parameters. There are the statewide requirements from New South Wales, which you've all got access to on the Tweed landing page on our Rose in the Ocean website, where you can see what those requirements are from the ministry. But it's important to dream big, because even though there's not the funding and resourcing to have this open 24/7 at the moment, it's still important to capture what the ideal is, and then that can always feed into future iterations of the service. In terms of the purpose of the safe space, people looking for a genuine alternative to going to ED, and for people in distress to define what the purpose of the space is for themselves. So when they turn up, it's up to them to determine how best that space is going to support them. And then it can address the person's distress. But it's a compassionate and trauma-informed space, and it's a space to just exist and feel safe. You don't have to fix something or do something. It's a place to be. From a physical environment, having a mix of spaces, so private individual rooms, quiet spaces, some open areas for activities. Layout is really important. So a lot of thought, you know, and acknowledgement that there's good thought that needs to go into how it's laid out. Open door is important, but mindful of separation of people for safety, e.g. looking at minors. So that's either young people, because there's obviously a very large youth focus and need in Tweed, but also for people who might arrive at the safe space and they've needed to bring their 2 little children, for example, because they couldn't leave them at home. Not a clinical environment, feels like a home, facilities to make tea and coffee, food in the fridge, quiet, soft music, simple things to make it homely, books and cushions, lighting, pictures, lounges, and safety features to support a small team of staff. So Lindy, I'll pass over to you for these next 3 areas.
Yeah, so then we talked about ideas for how to design the safe space. So we looked at staffing, access, location, and experience. So with staffing, some of the comments that were expressed were that the SP peer workers obviously had a lived experience of suicidal crisis, that they include a peer worker with a lived experience, perhaps as a carer, that they're able to match workers to particular guests. And this was really expressed a number of times, particularly in relation to age and gender, that peer workers meet people in ED and walk them to the safe space if required. And one of the really strong sort of comments that came throughout was people turning up to that actual safe space to be greeted and to be welcomed, that there was someone there as a peer worker who was going to greet the person, make them feel welcome and invite them in, was really expressed. That there were counsellors or access to psychologists, counsellors available in the space. Someone mentioned that. The diversity, including Indigenous representation, was very important. Cultural capacity training, and by that, you know, the capacity to understand, you know, a whole range of cultural, not just Indigenous people, but people from a variety of backgrounds, or you know, genders non-specific. Access and location. One of the strong feedback from you know, the health professionals and also from the lived experience people was the expression that it's available weekends and after hours, outside normal office hours. Off hospital grounds or close to ED, there was no real distinction there. Possibility of an existing hours near of an existing house that could be close to the hospital or to ED, which obviously with the thought in mind about that home feeling. Transparent information about the service for people entering the space was really, really strongly emphasised, that there is, everything is transparent, it's on the table, this is what's going to happen, this is what options available. There wasn't anyone who was taking the control away from the person or anything that was hidden. The experience, you can see there what people would experience once they arrive at the safe space. There it is there, someone to greet guests upon arrival and offer them something to eat or drink. That they don't have to go through a checklist. They just have a conversation. They don't have to keep retelling their story over and over. That it's just a place where they can turn up, it's relaxing and it's comfortable. That there is the possibility of having a clinician on call if needed. And also what was really considered as well and commented upon was an understanding or managing how we were going to manage the potential of people who became distressed by other people who may be in the safe space. And it was voluntary to come and voluntary to go.
Thanks, Lindy. We then wanted to understand from the health professionals group, what did they need to feel comfortable and confident in supporting people to access an alternative to ED safe space. So from a physical environment perspective, safe and private with access to private spaces. People talked about having a discrete entry so that being in a relatively small town, you could actually enter the space not just off the main street, so that if you wanted that privacy, that was available. Homely and cosy, warm weighted blankets, a quiet area with lounges, a TV area with other comforts to help people relax. Gender specific spaces, a proper bathroom with a bath, an outside area with a smoking area. Following a guest journey, there was a lot of discussion and there's room for more because the whole issue of, or the whole topic of what information does a safe space collect, what does it keep, what are people required to do, not required to do, and there's a lot of different views on this. One suggestion was that an app, which updates a person's journey. So it's not going to be within the scope of this, but there's a lot of safe spaces coming and there's a lot of work going on in suicide prevention. So it's really important to capture this. The idea being that you have that collected and you don't have to keep repeating it, that it can be shared. And I think there are some things that do that to a certain degree already. A way to advise that someone is coming, and transport options for young people, or it could be transport options for anyone who just needed it to get there or to get home. A way to know who is there at any given time. So there was discussion about if somebody comes in and they just decide to leave 5 minutes later, or they're there for 2 hours, do staff know exactly who's in the safe space at any point in time, and is that important? So there's still discussion to be had around that. From a staffing perspective, health professionals were saying a peer worker there to talk to people, that there's always somebody there. From an experience, what's it got to actually feel like? Warm and friendly, non-judgmental, a place just to be, no assessments, easy entry, welcoming for everyone, including from different backgrounds, so really inclusive. A warm greeting upon arrival, offer of food and a chat and drink and what have you, nicotine gum available for those who need it. So that was, I remember that comment being made prior to a discussion about, well, could we just have an outdoor area where smoking was allowed? But depending on where the site is, at least an option. Nurturing and non-clinical, including with record keeping. So if there's any record keeping to be done, that a way is found to do that in a really nurturing and non-clinical way. Connections with and information about other services, and safe space, a refuge for young people. The place in community, that the purpose of the space is communicated to the public, so that there is focus put on the actual comms that go out to your community about what is the space for, who is it for, how do they access it. And in terms of follow-up, feedback and communication with the space with consent. So if people were interested in being followed up the next day with a phone call or a text, that they were invited to leave their contact details, but that it was voluntary. So we'll come back to screen in just a moment. What you see there, though, is the link to the survey. You can go to the landing page on the Roses in the Ocean website. For those of you who've been part of the process, you've been sent that information already. For those of you that haven't, you go to rosesintheocean.com.au. You'll see a link there, or you'll see a tab that says sector. If you click on sector, you'll see New South Wales Ministry of Health, and scroll down there and you'll find the Northern New South Wales LHD Tweed. And there you will find all the information that we've talked about today, including the recording of this webinar and the link to the survey. Next steps, the survey will be open for a week, and then there's a group session being facilitated by the Northern New South Wales LHD with the health professionals all together. After that, we'll come back into a combined co-design session that will be led by Roses in the Ocean. We'll have equal representation of health professionals and people with lived experience of suicidal crisis. And then after that, there'll be another feedback loop, another set of survey questions. And then all of that then gets collated and is then provided to the LHD to move that into a service model design. All right, so I'm just going to stop my screen sharing there now. Thank you all so very, very much for your time. It's been a slightly longer webinar today because it's been a combination of what would normally be two separate ones. So thank you very much. Please, please, please share this webinar link, share the survey to as many of your colleagues, your friends, your community contacts, because the more people that respond to this within Tweed, the more perspectives we get, the more likely we are to meet the needs of all the people in the community. So please share it far and wide. One other thing I needed to mention to you was that Every Mind has been engaged by the New South Wales Ministry of Health to work on a communication strategy for all of the alternative to ED services across New South Wales. They are really looking for your feedback in terms of an overarching naming convention. So at the moment, they're being referred to as safe spaces, and they're looking to, is that what resonates for you? Do you have any other ideas? And do you want an overarching one? And then do you want the ability to name your particular space? So it might be, you know, Joe's space at Tweed or whatever, that's a terrible example, but you might call it something in Tweed, but it is known as a safe space or as a something else. So if you can put your thinking caps on and get that feedback back into your LHD, or bring it into us if you like, and we'll pass it on for you. But anyway, that's it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we really look forward to the next phase and to continue working with you. Lindy, any final words?
Yep. Thank you, everyone, and good luck with your journey. Thank you.